Rain pattered against the cracked window pane, a staccato rhythm that felt like someone breathing just beyond the glass. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor of her tiny apartment, staring at the dark hallway outside her door. She wasn't supposed to hear footsteps after midnight, especially not slow, dragging ones that didn't belong to her. At first, she thought it was the old pipes groaning, the building settling. But then it stopped. Silence, heavy, unnatural. And a whisper followed. "Lena." She froze. Her heart slammed against her ribcage. She hadn't told anyone she lived alone. Not her friends, not her co-workers. Yet that voice knew her name. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, a part of her wanting to open it, to confront the impossible. The hallway was empty. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and suffocating. A shadow moved just at the corner of her eye. Gone when she blinked, and then scratching, soft, deliberate, coming from the apartment next door. Her neighbor's place had been empty for months. No one had lived there, not since the old man vanished without a trace. Lena's phone lay on the table, screen dark. She thought about calling the police, but something in that silence whispered, "Don't call. They already know you're alone." The scratching stopped, and from the darkness another whisper, "Why are you in my room?" Lena had always liked living alone. It was quiet, peaceful, an escape from the chaos of the city. Her friends teased her about it, said she was brave, or perhaps foolish, but she liked the solitude. She liked being able to hear the hum of her own thoughts without the clutter of other people. Her apartment was small but cozy, a single bedroom, a kitchenette, and the living room where she spent most of her time curled up with a book. The walls were thin, though, thin enough to catch the faint echoes of her neighbors' lives, or in her case, the lack of them. The first odd thing happened a week after she moved in. A chair she didn't own was leaning against her door. She remembered it clearly. She hadn't brought any extra furniture, and the door had been closed when she went to bed. She brushed it off as a prank. Maybe a neighbor, though she hadn't met anyone yet. Then came the footsteps. At first, she thought it was the building settling. But the pattern was too precise, too rhythmic, too deliberate. Always at night, always slow, always fading when she tried to trace it. Her first conversation with the building's caretaker didn't help. Old Mr. Klein had a hoarse, whispery voice, and when she asked about the empty apartment next door, his face twitched. "No one lives there," he said. "Been empty." "Years." Lena's stomach knotted. The scratching started the very next night. She tried to ignore it, tried to sleep through it. But when she finally built the courage to peek through the peephole, all she saw was darkness. Absolute darkness. And in the corner of her vision, a silhouette that didn't belong. "What do you want?" she whispered into the empty hallway. The reply came from inside her own apartment this time, from beneath the bed. "Your attention." Her heart raced, and she felt the apartment shrink around her. Every shadow seemed to twist. Every object seemed slightly out of place. A picture frame tilted, though she hadn't touched it. Her mug slid a centimeter forward. A centimeter she hadn't moved it. Paranoia grew. She stopped answering the phone, stopped leaving lights on. She couldn't explain it to anyone. What would she say? That an empty apartment next door was alive, or worse, aware? The scratching escalated. The whispers became clearer, speaking her name, questioning her, accusing her of intruding into a space she had never entered. And every time she turned, the shadows seemed to move just beyond reach. One evening, she decided to peek through the crack under the neighbor's door. The air was cold, unnaturally cold. Her eyes strained in the darkness, but she saw nothing. Yet she felt a presence, watching, waiting, smiling. And then came the sound of breathing. Not hers, not from the hallway, but inside the empty apartment itself. Slow, wet, deliberate. The kind of breathing that belonged to something alive, something hungry. Over the next few days, Lena's life unraveled into a haze of fear and obsession. She set cameras, hoping to catch a trespasser. The footage showed only her empty apartment, quiet and undisturbed, until the last frame before the file corrupted. A shadow crouched in the corner, watching, smiling. Neighbors whispered as she passed. "That apartment has a history," they said. "People vanish there." She learned about Mr. Hargrove, a man who had lived there decades ago. Stories of his strange rituals, of visitors who never left, of a room that had swallowed people whole. Lena wanted to laugh it off, wanted to tell herself it was myth, but the scratches, the whispers, the moving objects, objects. They were all real. The apartment seemed to bend reality. Clocks ran backwards. Shadows lingered long after the light vanished. Her reflection sometimes smiled before she did. Her phone rang at impossible hours, each time a voice whispering secrets she didn't understand. She tried leaving. Spent a night at a friend's apartment. Slept finally in peace. But when she returned the next day, the air was thick. The room smelled faintly of something old and wet. Her books were rearranged. The chair she had seen weeks ago now faced the door directly, and the whisper was there waiting. "You left without asking?" She could no longer ignore it. Sleep became a luxury she could not afford. She stayed awake, watching shadows stretch and contract, tracing movements that weren't hers. Every night she felt the entity learn more about her, anticipate her thoughts, mock her. She tried confronting it. "What do you want?" She screamed into the darkness one night, voice shaking. A single word answered her. "Alone. Alone." The word hung in the air, heavy with intent. The apartment itself seemed to breathe, walls expanding and contracting like lungs. She realized then that she was not living alone. Never had been. The empty space next door was not empty. It never had been. Lena's sanity began to fray. She spoke to no one. She stopped eating properly. She drew protective symbols on doors, under windows, even on herself, but they did nothing. Whatever watched her learned, adapted, consumed fear like fuel. Her dreams turned to terror. She saw herself inside the neighbor's apartment, crawling across the floor, scratching at the walls, whispering her name over and over. She awoke screaming. Her reflection, her apartment, even her own thoughts, none of them were safe. The night it happened, the rain was relentless. Thunder shook the building as Lena huddled in her bedroom, clutching a kitchen knife. The scratching had become pounding. Whispers had become voices, mocking, pleading, screaming. She saw movement in the corner of the living room. Slow, deliberate. A shadow stepped out of the darkness. It had her face. Her body, but wrong. Its smile stretched impossibly wide. Eyes black as oil stared into hers. "Why are you in my room?" It hissed. Her own voice warped and twisted. She lunged, knife swinging. The shadow dissolved, only to reappear behind her, around her, everywhere. The walls of the apartment melted, revealing the next-door apartment, the hallway, a void beyond reality. Alone. It whispered again. You wanted alone. Panic became pure terror. She ran, tripping over furniture that wasn't hers, doors slamming shut on their own. She screamed into the night, but no one came. The city outside moved in its normal rhythm, oblivious, time fractured. Seconds stretched into hours. Her own voice betrayed her. Every whisper, every scratch, every shadow now part of her mind. She realized then that she had never truly been alone. Not once. The apartment, the building, the city, they all fed on solitude, on vulnerability, and she had been perfect prey. When she finally tried to escape through the front door, the hallway stretched impossibly long. Doors that weren't there before lined the corridor. She heard the neighbors' whispers, but when she looked, their faces were her own, grinning, and then darkness. Lena's apartment remained vacant the next morning. The neighbors whispered, but no one entered. The caretaker shook his head, muttering about old tenants who left quietly. The police found nothing. No signs of struggle, no evidence, no missing person report filed. Just an empty apartment. Weeks later, a new tenant moved in. She unpacked her boxes, unaware of the shadow watching from the corner. A single chair faced the door. One book lay on the floor, open to a page that read, "Alone is never truly alone." The rain pattered against the window. Softly, almost inaudibly, a whisper curled through the air. Lena. No one heard it. No one saw. But the apartment was ready again. The apartment building smelled of damp paint and decay. Outside, a storm raged, rattling the windows and filling the empty halls with echoes. Marcus had lived alone for 3 months and liked it that way, until the hallway started breathing. It began subtly. At night, when he stepped out to get water or check the mail, he felt it first. The air heavier, thicker, as though someone, or something, was watching from just beyond sight. A figure lingered at the far end, indistinct, cloaked in shadows. When he blinked, it vanished. Then came the tapping. Soft, deliberate, like fingernails drumming along the walls. It followed him from his door to the stairwell. "Who's there?" he whispered one night. No answer. Just the tap, 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 moving closer, circling, patient. His phone vibrated on the counter, though he hadn't touched it. The caller ID read, "Me." Marcus froze, the hairs on his neck standing rigid. And then the voice came from the hallway, low and urgent. Speaking his own words, "You shouldn't be alone." A gust of cold air rushed past him, carrying a faint smell of decay and wet earth. Marcus realized, with a sharp pang of terror, that the hallway had changed. It was narrower, longer, stretching beyond reason, bending around corners he had never seen. And somewhere in that darkness, something was waiting. Marcus had moved into the small, decaying apartment after a breakup. Alone, finally, in a place he could control. The building was old, a relic of the 1970s, with narrow hallways, creaking floors, and a single flickering light in the stairwell. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. For weeks, life seemed normal. He worked from home, cooked small meals, and kept the apartment orderly. But he couldn't ignore the sensation of being watched. Shadows lingered longer than they should. A door slammed shut somewhere in the building, even on windless nights. The building itself groaned under unseen weight. The first real incident happened one Thursday night. He returned from work to find his apartment door ajar. He was certain he'd locked it. Inside, everything seemed in place, but the mirror in the hallway reflected someone standing behind him. He spun around. No one. Only the long shadow cast by the hallway light, stretching impossibly, reaching for him. "Hello?" He called, voice tight. Silence. Then the whisper, almost playful, almost taunting, "Marcus." He checked the other doors. Empty. He told himself it was stress, imagination. The human mind plays tricks when lonely, but the incidents escalated. The tapping returned, louder now, echoing along the hall walls. The air grew colder, and objects in his apartment shifted subtly overnight. A chair facing the wall, a book open to a page he hadn't touched, a coffee mug on the floor. Neighbors avoided him when he asked questions. One elderly woman said quietly, "Some halls remember." "Some remember too much," Marcus laughed nervously. He didn't understand, but he started noticing patterns. The shadow moved with intention. The tapping followed him precisely. Sometimes he swore he saw a face in the darkness, pale, elongated, staring through walls, waiting for him to be unguarded. The night he finally realized he wasn't imagining anything, the shadow stood at the end of the hallway. He was locked in his apartment. The door wouldn't budge. The lights flickered. The tapping began inside the walls, inside the floors, inside his skull. Marcus began documenting everything: cameras, notebooks, timestamps. The hallway outside appeared alive. He could see it change in the footage, walls stretching, light bending, shadows gathering in impossible patterns. Neighbors whispered more. The last tenant left quietly. You'll see why. He researched the building's history. Constructed in 1972, dozens of unexplained disappearances, tenants vanishing without record, some presumed dead, some never found. Rumors said the hallways were cursed or haunted by the previous residents' anger. Marcus initially scoffed, until the whispers became coherent. "You're ours now." They came at night, voices whispering from behind walls, from the ceiling, from the floor. The hallways bent, elongated. He could no longer distinguish inside from outside. Every mirror reflected not just himself, but multiple versions, distorted, screaming, watching. He tried confronting it. "I'm leaving!" he shouted. The shadow laughed. A soundless, impossibly deep laugh that rattled the bones. The lights went out. When they returned, the figure was closer, grinning in a way no human mouth could manage. Sleep became impossible. He lay awake listening to tapping, breathing, whispers. His mind fractured. Time lost meaning. One day became indistinguishable from the next. Marcus tried recording the whispering voices. The tape played back his own voice, repeating everything he had said, faster, distorted, laughing. He screamed. The apartment seemed to pulse with it. Every corner hid something watching, something learning. He tried leaving. He reached the door, locked. He tried the windows, impossible. The hallway itself had grown, stretched, loops forming where none existed before. He was trapped in a labyrinth designed specifically for him. The entity's intent became clear. It didn't just want him afraid. It wanted him to exist in that hallway forever, alone but aware, isolated. Endless endlessly hunted by himself and the shadows of those who had disappeared before. On the fifth night of complete darkness, Marcus saw it, a figure moving inside the walls, limbs bending at impossible angles, face splitting into a grin that mirrored his own terror. He screamed, ran, and the hallway lengthened ahead of him. Doors appeared where none had been. Mirrors multiplied, reflecting infinite hallways, infinite versions of himself, screaming and laughing simultaneously. "You should never live alone," the voice said. His own voice. Warped, distorted, cruel. Desperation took him. He tried smashing the mirrors, breaking the walls, screaming until his throat bled. Each time the hallway repaired itself, shadows coiling tighter around him, whispers growing louder, mocking, intimate. He finally stumbled to a corner, walls pressing closer. The shadow manifested fully, copying his movements, smiling with that impossible grin. Marcus realized the hallway had always been waiting. The entity didn't hunt him. It welcomed him, shaped him, trapped him in the same infinite loop as all the missing tenants. He lunged one last time, hoping to escape, but the walls absorbed him. He screamed into infinite hallways, his reflection screaming back. The figure smiled, and silence fell. The next morning, the apartment seemed empty. The neighbors carried on oblivious. New tenants would move in, unaware of what waited in the twisting hallways. Marcus was gone. No trace, no record, no report. Only whispers lingered in the air, soft, almost unnoticed. Marcus. And at night, the hallway breathed, stretched, and waited for the next person foolish enough to live alone. A single lamp flickered in the corridor. A shadow paused, grinning. The entity remembered. Alone was never truly alone. Emma had never noticed it before, just a faint outline on the ceiling above her bed. A shadow that shouldn't exist. At first she blamed the streetlights, their weak glow slipping through the blinds. But tonight, the shadow moved. It stretched and shifted, coiling across the ceiling like black smoke in slow motion. She froze under the blankets, heart hammering, mind screaming that it was impossible. Then she heard the whisper, "Look at me." The voice came from above, distorted, layered with something older, something hungry. Emma's stomach nodded. She lived alone. She had been alone for months. The shadow pulsed, bending toward her. It wasn't just dark, it was absence, a piece of the night that didn't belong in her room. Her phone lay on the nightstand, bright in the darkness, yet when she looked, the screen displayed one word: alone. A gust of wind swirled around her room, though the windows were closed. The ceiling light flickered, and then the shadow whispered again, closer this time, dripping with intent. "You can't hide." Emma wanted to scream. She wanted to move, but her body wouldn't obey. The darkness above wasn't just a shadow, it was alive, waiting, feeding on her solitude. And in the quiet of her apartment, she realized, tonight, she wouldn't be sleeping alone. Emma had always cherished living alone. A small apartment in an aging building downtown, affordable and quiet. Perfect for someone who worked nights and needed solitude. She liked the control, no one borrowing her things, no unexpected visitors, no compromises. The first few weeks were perfect. She read, cooked, slept on her own schedule. But subtle things started, lights dimming for no reason, books slightly moved on the shelves, her cat staring at corners that seemed wrong. She told herself it was nothing. Old buildings had quirks, she rationalized. Creaks, drafts, shifting shadows. But the shadow on the ceiling didn't fit. It didn't behave like light or architecture. It followed her. It waited. One night, she stayed up late reading. Her eyes wandered to the ceiling. The shadow wriggled toward the corner, a black smear that shouldn't exist. The hairs on her arms stood on end. "You're awake," it whispered. Emma yelped, heart thundering. The whisper was soft, almost conversational, but filled with menace. She turned on the bedside lamp. The shadow didn't disappear. It spread. Across the walls, across the curtains, crawling closer. She called her best friend the next day, trying to explain. Her friend laughed nervously. "Maybe it's stress. You work nights. Your brain is just tired." Emma wanted to believe it. She tried rationalizing the creeping unease, but at night, the shadow returned. Always. Waiting. Watching. The apartment felt smaller. The walls seemed to bend. The air thickened. Even the cat hissed at the ceiling. Something had moved in above her, something that knew she was alone and delighted in it. As days passed, Emma's reality warped. The shadow became more defined. At times she swore it had a face, elongated, featureless, but somehow mocking her. It moved independently of the light, bending around corners, crawling across surfaces. She tried ignoring it. She tried sleeping with every light on. She tried leaving her apartment for hours. But each time she returned, the shadow waited, stretching toward her bed, closer than before. She researched the building, discovering old tenants had reported ceiling shadows that moved and whispered. No one stayed long. One tenant vanished, leaving only a black smear on the ceiling, never explained. Emma's isolation magnified her fear. Nights became torture. The shadow whispered constantly, repeating her thoughts, mocking her fears, twisting her memories. "You can't hide," it said. "Look at me." Alone is lonely. Objects moved around her. Doors opened when she didn't touch them. Mirrors reflected the shadow creeping along the walls behind her, even when she turned. The cat disappeared for hours, returning with fur matted and eyes wide with fear. She started recording the ceiling. On the footage, the shadow stretched impossibly, coiling, pulsating, almost breathing. Sometimes it leaned down, as if it could step from the ceiling to the floor. The audio captured whispers, her own voice, asking questions she had never spoken aloud. Emma attempted to confront it. "What do you want?" she shouted one night, trembling. The whisper came immediately. To be seen, to be feared, to be remembered. Her mind frayed. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. Every attempt to leave the apartment was thwarted. Doors jammed. Elevators stopped. Streets seemed to fold back onto themselves. She was trapped inside a building that had become a predator. The shadow grew bolder. It began to extend onto the floor, reaching for her toes, curling along the furniture, smothering light. Its voice became her thoughts, her doubts, her memories, her terror. She realized she wasn't just observed, she was being consumed. One night, the shadow descended fully, covering the ceiling and walls, suffocating the room in absolute darkness. Emma backed into a corner, her body pressed against the wall, knife clutched in trembling hands. "You're mine," it whispered. Her voice layered multiple tones, growing louder, omnipresent. The floorboards rippled beneath her feet. Objects levitated slightly, circling her. Her reflection appeared in the window, eyes hollow, grin impossibly wide. Time slowed. The ceiling warped, bending down like molten black glass. She screamed, slashing at the shadow. Her knife passed through the darkness like air. It laughed in her mind, feeding on her panic. Emma stumbled backward into the closet. The shadow followed, curling through the door gap, wrapping around the walls. Her breath came in sharp, painful gasps. "You wanted to live alone. Now you will," it whispered. The room collapsed in on itself. Light fractured, sound distorted. The shadow fused with her own reflection, her own body, her own thoughts. She realized the truth. The entity did not just haunt. It became the lonely, consuming those who dared solitude, folding them into itself, leaving nothing behind. Emma screamed into endless darkness, vanishing into the shadow that claimed her. The next day, the apartment appeared undisturbed. The neighbors noticed a new tenant moving in, unaware of what had happened. The closet where Emma had vanished was empty. No sign of struggle, no trace of her existence. The ceiling seemed normal under the daylight, yet subtle shadows shifted ever so slightly. Sometimes, late at night, a faint whisper could be heard, repeating a name no one would recognize. Emma. The cat never returned. The building waited. Another apartment, another solitary tenant, another shadow eager to consume. Alone was no longer a choice. It was a trap. And above the new tenant's bed, the ceiling pulsed faintly, black as ink, as though remembering. Ethan had lived alone in his small apartment for nearly a year, enjoying the quiet, until he noticed the door. It wasn't the front door, he had double-checked it countless times, but a door inside his apartment, one he had never seen before, had appeared overnight. Solid wood, old and scarred, with a brass knob that gleamed faintly in the dim hallway light. He tried opening it. Locked. "No one lives here," he whispered to himself, trying to rationalize. He had only one bedroom, one bathroom. There should be no extra door. Then came the sound, scratching. Slow, deliberate, echoing from the other side. Not nails on wood, but something heavier, something alive. He pressed his ear against the door. "Ethan!" He jumped back, heart hammering. He hadn't told anyone his name. He hadn't opened that door, hadn't even known it existed yesterday. The brass knob rattled. A whisper followed, almost a hiss. "Let me in." Ethan's hands shook. He looked around the apartment. Everything seemed normal. The furniture hadn't moved. The walls hadn't changed. But the door, it was wrong. It shouldn't be there. And whatever was behind it wanted him. Ethan had always liked living alone. He enjoyed the silence after work, the way he could move through his small apartment without worrying about anyone else's habits or clutter. He prided himself on his routines, his control over his own space. The door appeared on a Tuesday. He returned home after grocery shopping, placing bags on the kitchen counter, and noticed it. An unremarkable wooden door in the corner of the hallway. A door that had not existed the day before. He laughed nervously at first. Perhaps a trick of the light, a shadow, a misplaced piece of furniture. But the door was solid, real, unmistakable. He tried the handle, locked, cold metal under his fingers. The wood was old, scratched with faint, strange symbols etched deep into the grain. A smell seeped from the cracks. Damp earth, rotting leaves, something decayed and animalistic. The scratching started that night. Slow, deliberate, like claws dragging across the floor. He couldn't locate it. It came from the door, the hallway, the walls. All at once. "Who's there?" Ethan called, his voice cracking. The answer came from behind the door, low. "Deliberate. You are." Ethan's logical mind fought to explain it. Prank? Stress? Dream? But the terror in his chest told him the truth. He was not alone. Not in the apartment. Not in the building. The door waited. The following days turned Ethan's life into a waking nightmare. He tried ignoring the door, covering it with furniture, painting over it. Each night the scratching returned, louder, more insistent. The whispers came in his sleep, calling his name, repeating secrets he had never spoken aloud. Neighbors avoided him. He asked about strange noises or the appearance of new doors. Some stared blankly. Others shook their heads. One elderly man muttered, "Some doors shouldn't be opened. Some doors wait for you to fail." Ethan researched the building. Over 50 years old, constructed on the edge of an abandoned cemetery. Tenants had vanished. Others reported doors appearing overnight, leading nowhere, or somewhere terrifying. He recorded the door, cameras pointed from multiple angles. At first nothing. Then one night the brass knob turned slowly by itself. The camera caught movement inside the door, shapes shifting, coiling, crawling across the frame. Faint voices whispered from beyond, not just his own name, but phrases he hadn't heard before. "You've seen me." "You belong here." Ethan tried leaving. But the building felt different. Hallways stretched, doors shifted. Stairwells led to the same floor repeatedly. Every attempt to escape returned him to the door. Sleep became impossible. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room, moving independently of the light. Objects shifted subtly. The air grew heavy, and the whispering followed him into every corner of his apartment. The entity behind the door was patient. It learned him, mocked him, shaped the apartment into a trap specifically for him. He realized then the door didn't just contain something, it was something. A living void, feeding on his solitude, his fear, his curiosity. One stormy night, the scratching escalated to pounding. Ethan could feel vibrations through the floor, walls, and ceiling. He pressed himself against the far wall, knife in hand, trembling. The door rattled violently. The brass knob spun on its own, clicking in a rhythm like a heartbeat. The whispers grew louder, urgent, chaotic. "Open! Let me in! You can't hide!" Ethan lunged, trying to block the door with a chair. It slid across the floor as if the room had grown slick with something unseen. The door swung open, revealing nothing. Blackness, deeper than the night, moving like liquid. From the darkness, shapes emerged. Faces, limbs, impossible forms, all contorted in silent screams. They reached for him, coiling through the apartment, merging with shadows. His reflection in the window grinned at him, an impossible mirrored version. Ethan screamed, slashing at the darkness. It passed through his hands, his knife, and even his own body. He realized the door did not just lead somewhere, it was everywhere the building had ever trapped, feeding on every tenant who had lived alone. "You shouldn't live alone," it hissed in unison, voices layered, warped, his own voice among them. The room collapsed. Walls melted, floors bent. The door closed behind him with a final deafening slam. Silence fell. Ethan was gone. The next morning, the apartment appeared undisturbed. No sign of struggle. The neighbors whispered among themselves, but no one dared approach. The brass door remained, locked, ordinary looking now in the daylight. Weeks later, a new tenant moved in. The door waited silently in the corner of the hallway. Late at night, a faint scratching could be heard. Whispers curled around the walls, faint but persistent. "Ethan." The apartment was ready again. Alone was never safe. Alone was never simple. Alone was a trap, patiently waiting for the next inhabitant foolish enough to forget that some doors should never exist. Sophie always thought the apartment above her was empty. Months had passed and she'd never seen anyone move in. But tonight, the floorboards above her bedroom creaked, not lightly, not the way old buildings settle, but deliberate heavy steps pacing back and forth. She froze, listening. A whisper floated down through the ceiling. "Do you hear me?" Her heartbeat thumped painfully in her chest. She hadn't mentioned her living alone to anyone. No one should know she was there. A single lamp flickered on, though she hadn't touched it. The shadows in her room stretched unnaturally toward the ceiling. A cold gust circled her as if someone, or something, was leaning over the edge watching her. Then came a soft knock. Not at the door, not the windows, but through the ceiling itself. Hollow, deliberate, rhythmic. "Come up," it hissed, as a voice layered with multiple tones, some familiar, some alien. Sophie scrambled back from her bed. The ceiling seemed closer now, pressing down, bending the light. The steps above grew louder, moving closer to her. Each strike against the floor above felt like a heartbeat in her chest, echoing through the apartment, through her bones. She realized with sudden terror she had never been truly alone. Someone, or something, was living above her, watching, waiting, learning, and tonight, it would finally decide whether she stayed alone or became part of the apartment's haunted history. Sophie had always liked her studio apartment. Small, simple, cheap, but hers. Living alone had been liberating. She could decorate freely, eat late at night, watch movies at full volume. For months, she assumed the apartment above her was empty. No lights at night, no sounds beyond the occasional settling of old floorboards. But one evening, returning from work, she noticed faint scuffing sounds above her ceiling. Probably someone moving in, she muttered. Yet, when she checked with the landlord, the apartment had remained vacant for months. The first night the footsteps began in earnest, she stayed awake, listening to the deliberate pacing. Heavy, slow, not accidental. They paused over certain spots, as if deciding where to stand, what to watch. The knocking followed. Soft at first, then louder. Polished wood or bare floorboards, impossible to tell. Sometimes she swore she heard voices. Multiple voices, overlapping, whispering her name. Sophie tried rationalizing. Rats, settling floors, an overactive imagination. But the feeling of being observed gnawed at her. Every movement she made was echoed by the sounds above. She stopped leaving lights on, afraid the ceiling would notice. Objects began to shift subtly in her apartment. Her coffee mug one night was on the floor, her blanket pulled tight across the bed even though she hadn't touched it. Shadows grew thicker, pooling unnaturally in corners. She tried calling the landlord again, asking about the empty apartment. His response was vague. Some units, they attract attention. Not all doors are meant to stay empty. Sophie felt a chill. She hadn't even realized she had been thinking about moving into a different building, but her instinct screamed she wouldn't make it out. Not alone, not tonight. As days passed, the entity above her became bolder. It moved independently of gravity, sometimes sounding as if it were walking upside down or sideways. Scratching noises, whispers, and soft taps accompanied every movement. Sophie tried leaving, but the building seemed to resist. Elevator buttons malfunctioned. Stairs looped back to her floor. Hallways warped in impossible ways. Even the front door, when opened, led only to the lobby, which then shifted, appearing unfamiliar. She began recording everything, audio, video, even thermal footage. The recordings revealed impossible phenomena. Shadows moved in directions that defied light. The ceiling itself appeared warped, bending downward over her bed like a living membrane. At night, the whispering intensified. It spoke in layered voices, one her own, one unfamiliar, one distant hollow, like hundreds of people trapped in a single tone. You're alone. Alone, alone. Her sleep disappeared. She became hyper-aware, checking every corner, every shadow, every sound. The cat she had adopted months earlier refused to go near the ceiling, hissing at nothing. Objects shifted further. Books rearranged themselves. Lamps toppled, mirrors angled to reflect impossible parts of the ceiling. Sophie realized the entity wasn't just haunting her, it was studying her, learning her habits, shaping the apartment to trap her more effectively. One night, the entity made itself partially visible. A dark form pressed against the ceiling, stretching impossibly, limbs bending in unnatural ways. A face emerged, featureless but terrifyingly alive, grinning down at her. "You will join me," it whispered, voice layered with menace and anticipation. The terror became physical. Breathing shallow, chest tight, shadows pressing, bending around her, crawling along walls, dripping from ceiling corners. She felt herself fading, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, becoming part of the apartment's haunted memory. On a stormy night, the entity descended fully, folding the ceiling down over her room. The shadows twisted into humanoid forms, but their limbs were impossibly long, faces warped, mouths stretching in silent screams. Sophie tried to run to the door, but the hallway outside her apartment had changed. It was longer, darker, and every step echoed like a drumbeat inside her skull. The ceiling pressed down, limbs reaching for her, whispers layering over her thoughts. "You cannot leave. You belong above, below, within," she screamed and clawed at the walls, knife in hand, but the entity absorbed her attempts. Every action fed it. Every breath strengthened it. The ceiling broke apart like liquid, shadows wrapping around her, coiling into her body. She fell, screaming into the darkness, her own voice joining the layered chorus that had whispered to her for nights. Time fractured. The apartment, the ceiling, the building itself twisted into an endless loop. Sophie's awareness splintered. She understood at last. The entity didn't want her dead. It wanted her alone, trapped in the apartment, folded into the ceiling, feeding the cycle for the next tenant. And then she disappeared. The apartment remained intact the next morning. Lights, furniture, walls, everything appeared normal. The neighbors noticed nothing unusual. Weeks later, another tenant moved in. The ceiling above her bedroom was empty, quiet, but a faint creaking, a whisper, a presence lingered, waiting. Late at night, a layered voice softly hissed, "Sophie." The apartment had claimed her. The entity continued to grow, feeding on solitude, observing, remembering. Alone was never safe, and above the next tenant's bed, the ceiling pulsed faintly, black as ink, alive with memory. Noah lived alone in his corner apartment high above the city. He liked the view at night, the twinkling lights, the quiet hum of life far below. Until he noticed something in the window. It wasn't his reflection. Not exactly. It mimicked him perfectly. But there was a slight delay, a twitch in the smile that made his stomach knot. Every time he moved, it lagged, then exaggerated, grinning when he frowned, tilting its head when he looked straight ahead. "Who's there?" he whispered, though he already knew. The reflection raised its hand, mocking, then tapped on the glass from the inside, though Noah was the one outside. He stumbled back, heart hammering, staring in disbelief. He covered the window with a curtain. The twitching continued. He unplugged his lights. The shape remained, faintly visible in the darkness, crouching, waiting. Then came a whisper, soft but undeniably real. "Let me in." Noah's hands shook as he touched the glass. The reflection moved independently now, pressing a hand against the inside, exactly where his palm would meet it. He felt the cold creep into his bones. For the first time since moving in, Noah understood that he was not alone. Not ever. And that the thing in the window was learning, watching, waiting. Noah had always liked living alone. A small, modern apartment on the 21st floor gave him space, light, and a sense of safety. He enjoyed the quiet, the freedom to make the apartment exactly as he wanted. The first night he noticed the reflection, he thought he was tired. He had worked late, staring at screens for hours. But the longer he looked, the more he noticed subtle differences. The reflection blinked too slowly, smiled too widely, and tilted its head at impossible angles. The next morning, he drew the curtains. The reflection was gone, or so he thought. That night, the twitch returned, delayed by milliseconds, but deliberate, mocking. It didn't speak at first, just waited, observed. Every movement of Noah's body was mirrored but distorted. He began feeling that the reflection wasn't just observing. It was learning, predicting his actions, imitating his thoughts. Noah tried covering the windows, installing blackout curtains, and even moving his furniture. But the reflection found him. It pressed its face to the glass from the inside, smiling in ways he couldn't. At times he thought he heard whispers. Noah, come, alone. Days turned into nights filled with terror. Noah's reflection grew bolder. Sometimes it didn't wait for him to move. It acted independently. Gestures, expressions, even speech. One night he heard the glass whisper, "You belong here." He started recording the windows, capturing video and audio. Playback was terrifying. The reflection moved differently on tape, twisting, stretching unnaturally, then grinning with faces that weren't human. Whispered voices layered over one another. Some his own, some unknown. Noah stopped eating properly. He stayed awake, fearing the reflection would act while he slept. Every mirror, every glossy surface reflected the same twisted version of himself. He became paranoid, doubting reality itself. Attempts to escape the apartment failed. Doors led to the same hallway, windows to the same street. Even the elevator seemed to loop back onto his floor. He realized he was trapped, not by walls but by the reflection itself. Objects moved subtly, lamps, books, even his keys. He was being observed, his apartment shaped to isolate him further. Every moment alone fed the thing in the window, teaching it, preparing it. On the seventh night, the reflection fully materialized. Not just an image, but a presence. Shadows from the glass slithered into the apartment, coiling along the walls, floor, and ceiling. The thing grinned, impossibly wide, pressing against the interior of the glass. Noah, it whispered in layered voices. Alone, mine. He lunged, smashing the glass with a chair. The figure didn't break. Instead, the shadow flowed through cracks, surrounding him. He felt cold seep into his skin, his mind, his soul. The reflection's grin became his own. He ran to the door. It twisted, elongated, folding hallways into impossible angles. The elevator led him nowhere. Every step echoed into infinity, chasing him back into the apartment. Finally, he backed into a corner. The reflection pressed forward, merging with his shadow. His own face twisted, grinning as though possessed. He realized too late. The reflection didn't want to leave him alive. It wanted him trapped, folded into the glass. Another layer of the entity, ready for the next tenant. Noah screamed as the shadow engulfed him, disappearing into the glass, his consciousness dissolving into whispers and darkness. The apartment appeared normal the next morning. Neighbors noticed nothing unusual. The window reflected the city below, peaceful and ordinary. Weeks later, a new tenant moved in. Everything seemed fine, but at night, a faint tapping came from the window. The reflection watched, always watching. Soft whispers carried through the glass. Noah. Alone. Mine. The apartment had claimed another soul. Alone was never safe, and the reflection waited patiently for the next person foolish enough to think living alone meant safety. It was 2:13 a.m. when the phone rang. Samantha lived alone in an apartment she thought was safe. The call displayed no number, just blank. She hesitated. Her hand shook as she picked it up. "Hello?" she whispered. No answer, just heavy breathing. At first, she thought it was a prank. She hung up. The silence returned, but only for a moment. The phone rang again and again. Each call came faster than the last, each ring slicing through the quiet of her apartment. Then a voice came through, low, distant, yet unmistakably familiar. "Alone." Samantha froze. Her mind raced. She hadn't told anyone she was alone. She hadn't spoken her fears aloud. Yet the voice knew. The whispers multiplied, layering over themselves. Her own voice joined, repeating words she had never said aloud. Each call grew longer, heavier, almost alive. The lights flickered. The air thickened. Shadows in the corners of her apartment stretched, reaching toward her. The voice said one thing, soft but urgent. "Don't answer." But you can't stop answering. Samantha realized with a sinking dread that the calls would never end, that they weren't just from a phone, that something or someone was inside her apartment, inside her life, and inside her mind. Alone had never been safe. And now it would never be silent again. Samantha had recently moved into the apartment for work. It was small, quiet, isolated, perfect for her focus and solitude. She liked being alone. No distractions, no interruptions, just peace. The first call came at 2:13 a.m., a blank number. She thought it was a wrong number and ignored it. But when it rang again, she hesitated. The voice on the line was just a whisper, her own name. Over the next few nights, the calls multiplied. Sometimes the voice repeated her thoughts, mocking, twisting them. Sometimes it spoke secrets she hadn't shared. She tried recording it, showing it to friends. Nothing captured the calls. No sound on the tape. The phone logs showed missed calls from blank numbers that didn't exist. Samantha tried leaving her apartment. The city outside felt distorted, looping back to her floor. Even the streets seemed to fold, guiding her back home. The calls weren't just from the phone. They followed her. Echoes of them whispered from corners, walls, mirrors, and even the ceiling. The building itself seemed alive, amplifying the calls, multiplying the whispers, feeding on her fear. By the fifth night, Samantha could no longer distinguish reality from the voice. The phone rang constantly, even when unplugged. The whispers filled her ears when she slept. Shadows grew in corners, pressing closer when the calls came. Each call repeated one phrase, layered in multiple voices. Alone. Answering, mine. She tried burning the phone, smashing it, throwing it out the window. Each time, a new phone appeared on the counter, pristine, silent, until it rang. She began seeing flashes of figures from the previous stories. A man trapped in a hallway, a woman in a ceiling shadow, someone pressed against a window. Faces she did not recognize, yet intimately familiar. The calls escalated. They spoke directly to her fears, mimicking voices she loved, voices she hated, voices she thought were gone. The shadows moved with the rhythm of the ringing. The apartment seemed alive, bending around her, learning her patterns, feeding on her isolation. She recorded everything. The footage was chaotic, distorted shadows, reflections moving independently, whispers layering over each other, sometimes her own voice among them. She realized the truth. The building itself was a nexus. It trapped the lonely, feeding on fear, learning, and multiplying it. Every tenant alone had been consumed in a different way, through hallways, ceilings, windows, doors, reflections. She was the last one the building needed to complete its cycle. On the seventh night, the apartment transformed. Walls stretched, shadows wrapped around her, whispers screamed in layered cacophony. The phones rang incessantly, filling the space with impossible sounds, dozens of voices, dozens of versions of her own name. Samantha backed into a corner. Every window, mirror, and surface reflected faces, hers distorted, screaming. Shadows coiled and pressed in, mimicking hands, arms, reaching for her, pressing her against the floor. The calls converged into a single command. "Answer, or be lost," she screamed, covering her ears, smashing phones. But the whispers burrowed into her mind. Shapes crawled along the walls, dripping from the ceiling, stretching across the floors. The air was alive, pulsing with sound and shadow. Her own reflection appeared in the blackened windows, grinning. Every victim before her materialized within the shadows. Marcus, Emma, Ethan, Sophie, Noah. Faces contorted, silent screams trapped on their lips. They beckoned her. She realized too late. The building did not want to kill her. It wanted her alone, folded into its network, a voice in its eternal phone calls. Her scream joined the chorus. The apartment pulsed, alive, feeding on the fear and solitude of every soul it had trapped. And then silence fell. But not truly. The calls never ended. The next morning, the apartment appeared normal. A new tenant would eventually move in, unaware of the entity within. The phones waited, silent but ready. The shadows lingered in corners, in mirrors, in ceilings, and hallways. Somewhere inside the building, a layered chorus whispered endlessly, "Alone." answering mine. Samantha's consciousness became another voice in the never-ending phone calls, another layer of the entity's patience. Alone was never safe. Solitude was a trap, and the building waited, always waiting for the next person foolish enough to live alone. The cycle would continue. The phones would ring. The shadows would watch. The whispers would beckon. Alone would never end.